it's a primer on the mind, the psychology of this former KGB guy. If anyone going into a summit with him should just watch your interview, talk to us about all the things you learned. You knew him before, you've interviewed him before, but this was 90 minutes of Vladimir Putin days before the G7 and, of course, the summit with President Biden.
Yeah, Andrea, you know, he denies, he deflects, he goes back to past resentments from history. He does all of the things on subject after subject that we have come to know on cyber hacking, on the question of human rights with 2 Americans held in a prison, in a jail here in Russia. He continually threatens and denies and then offers to negotiate. And Andrea, you and I spoke on a number of occasions before the interview, and I so much appreciate the conversations that we had in the run-up to this interview, and we really wanted to ask him about that very moving report that you made on the border with Turkey and Syria with the UN, looking at that vital lifeline for so many people that could be closed if Russia uses its veto at the Security Council. We wanted to ask President Putin about that, ask him why he would even be considering closing that lifeline for so many Syrians. Take a listen. Our own Andrea Mitchell saw just this month the last border crossing into Syria, where supplies literally keep people alive. You're threatening to close that crossing in July at the Security Council. Why would you do that, knowing that it will cause the death of refugees?
Look, unfortunately, there are already a great deal of tragedies there, and all our actions in their totality need to be geared at stabilizing the situation and bringing it into a normal course of events. And with support of Russia, Syria, the Syrian authorities have been able to bring back under their control over 90% of the Syrian territory. What needs to be set up now is humanitarian assistance to people irrespective of any kind of political context. However, our partners in the West in general, both the United States and the Europeans, have been saying that they're not going to give any help to Assad. What does Assad have to do with it? Help people who need that assistance, just the most basic things. They won't even lift restrictions on supplies of medications and medical equipment, even in the context of the coronavirus infection. But that is just inhumane. And this kind of cruel attitude to people cannot be explained in any way. As far as the border crossings for delivery of humanitarian assistance, there is the Idlib area where combatants are still robbing people, killing people, raping people. There is the Al-Tanf zone, which, by the way, is controlled by the U.S. military. Recently, we caught there a group of gangsters who had come from there, and they directly said that they had specific goals as far as Russian military facilities. As far as border crossings, our position is such that assistance needs to be given, just as it should be done in the entire world, and as it is provided for in the rules of international humanitarian law, through the central government. That is how assistance should be given, and it should not be discriminated against. And if there are grounds to believe that the central government of Syria will plunder something, will steal something, well, set up observers on the part of the International Red Cross and Red Crescent who will oversee everything. I don't think that anybody in the Syrian government is interested in stealing some part of this humanitarian assistance. It just needs to be done through the central government. And in this sense, we support President Assad because a different mode of behavior would be undermining the sovereignty of the Syrian Arab Republic, and that's all. As far as the Idlib zone, the Turkish troops there effectively control the border between Turkey and Syria, and convoys cross the border without any restrictions on their numbers in both directions.
So what you heard there, Andrea, is another piece of the Putin playbook, using leverage, using the threat of closing that border crossing in order to put pressure on to try to have sanctions and restrictions lifted on his ally, President Assad. It's the kind of thing that the Biden administration needs to keep in mind. That's the strategy that the Kremlin will use as President Biden gets ready for this sit-down with President Putin, Andrea.
Well, you know, thank you so much for raising that issue with him, because the fact is that Assad and Russia have been bombing those people. That's why they're in refugee camps. More than 3 million people and 4 million people displaced along that border area because they're attacked as enemies by the Assad regime and now by Russia, its allies. And that is why the UN is monitoring the aid that gets through, checking every single box. I watched it with my own eyes, as did our UN ambassador. And of course, it won't get to the people if it goes through Assad, who is trying to starve these people and bomb them to death.